I've just finished setting up my new 3D printed hobby station, and while I was filling up the brush holders, paint racks and drawers, I took stock of what tools and equipment I actually use for my hobby, and what's just been collecting dust. So today I'll walk you through my must-have hobby essentials, a few nice-to-haves, and a few tools or equipment you can probably skip. I'm Jacob from Painted for Combat, and let's get right into it. To clarify, yes, this channel focuses more on FDM printing for the miniatures hobby. However, my personal hobby time is just as much taken up by plastic miniatures as it is by FDM ones. So this equipment list will be a mix of things from across my hobby, both on and off the channel. And that brings us to the first thing on my list of must-haves, and what might be the most universal thing we'll be looking at today. Paint. My go-to hobby brand is Army Painter, as it's generally one of the more available ranges here in New Zealand, and their new Fanatic Mega Set, along with a few additional colours, is my go-to for quality miniature paints. They have a high pigmentation and a good range of colours, and with their 6-colour system ranging from darks to lights, it makes it easy to pick out your ranges. So in my opinion, picking up something like the Fanatic Starter Set would be a perfect first paint set if you're just looking to get into painting. That said, I do have one major gripe with the Fanatic paint line. The reds in this paint line, they aren't very red. The cool reds that come in the Mega Set are a lot more on the pink side, which I thought was just due to their nature as cool reds, but having now picked up some of their warm reds as well, none of these exactly read as red to me. So personally, I've started leaning more towards having a pot of Citadel's Mephiston red on hand. I also have a small collection of speed paints of a few different colours. I find these great for quick paint jobs, or even just for picking out small details like belts or pouches on higher effort minis. And I especially love thinning these down as glazes or washes to tint or add saturation to existing paint jobs. Not to mention, the speed paint metallics are phenomenal metallic paints, so even if you don't want a full collection of speed paints, picking up 4 or 5 bottles, just some primary colours, can add a lot to your hobby arsenal. Along with these paints, I also have a collection of old Army Painter war paints and Citadel pots from earlier in my hobby that I still like to keep on hand. Along with a few cheap craft paints, I like to use this older collection on terrain builds or bases, letting me keep my nicer paints in reserve for actual miniatures. Picking up a few bottles of cheap dollar store craft paint, black, grey, brown and green especially, will absolutely save you from ploughing through all of your nice paints on bases and terrain. While we're on the topic of paints, this is also a good time to mention some paint-adjacent products that I like to have on hand. If you're like me and don't have a great space to rattle can prime, and don't always want to pull out the airbrush to prime models, a good brush-on primer is perfect. I really like to use Army Painter air primers as they have a nice pre-thinned consistency that still allows for great application with a brush. I do have a full video on how I prime miniatures, specifically FDM models, which I'll leave up in the card and down in the description if you want to check out my process for brush-on priming. I also like to have some matte varnish on hand, which every so often I'll load into my airbrush and varnish all of the minis that I've painted recently. And while not essential, a gloss varnish is also nice to have for mixing up some blood effects, adding sheen, or making part of a model look wet. But what good is paint without a brush? I'm not some high-skilled painter, so I won't be recommending you $30 or $40 brushes here. For starting out, if you do pick up a paint set that comes with a brush, that brush will be totally fine. The Army Painter base coat brushes have done me solid work, and if you feel the need for a smaller brush or want another, I would say to pick up a cheap synthetic. Personally, I get these cheap brushes from my local hardware store that easily last me 5 or 6 months before needing a replacement. But if you're like me and want to slightly step up from those cheap brushes without committing to very expensive ones, I've been using this Army Painter character brush for probably almost a year now, and it's still doing solid work. Another type of brush that I cannot recommend higher is to find yourself a cheap eyeshadow brush. Ideally something with sort of 1 to 2 centimeter bristles. These make for perfect dry brushes, and in my experience they've cost me even less than synthetic paintbrushes. Absolute must-have. I also like to keep some sponge-like materials on hand. Packing foam from my airbrushes is what I'm currently using, but anything that comes with packing foam like this would be perfect for sponge-on applications to weather models or create interesting paint jobs. Even something like this felt can create some really interesting patterns as well. So, the next time you get a package that has similar packing materials in it, maybe consider holding on to them. And no Painted for Combat equipment list would be complete without the one thing you see in almost all of my miniature videos. My painting handles. These handles are 3D printed and designed to easily be able to swap the caps, so you can quickly change between miniatures on the fly. If you want to pick up these files, they are available within the Welcome Bundle over on my Patreon for all of the STL tier and above supporters. In terms of a palette, I've been using the Stay Wet palette since I started my miniatures hobby, swapping out the sponges for either some cheap flat kitchen sponge pads with unwaxed parchment paper, or as of recent an Army Painter wet palette pad and its refills. Alongside that, I also picked up one of these fidget poppers, which is absolutely perfect for washes, glazes, or speed paints. And once you're done, just let it dry and pop it out. But of course, if you don't want a fancy palette, just about any flat object will do. Personally, I often find myself using failed 3D prints or playing cards as palettes for quick projects. When it comes to clippers, I like to keep a few pairs of cheap, generic clippers on hand. One of these came with my Neptune 3 Pro back in the day, and I picked up a few more pairs, all of which I like to use on a range of projects, from FDM support removal to rough cuts on larger models. When it comes to nippers for plastic kits, however, for a while I'd been using these Army Painter nippers, and frankly I hate these. They do not cut better than my cheap ones, and the head is so bulky that it's near impossible to cut models off a sprue without the clippers sliding or cutting into the model itself. So I recently decided to upgrade to a pair of single edge nippers. These are the Mr. Hobby ones, but there are a few brands out there with very similar products. These cut through sprue plastic like butter, give a clean flat cut, and are nice and thin, giving plenty of control. I cannot express over footage how much nicer these are, but if you're looking to buy nippers and have money on hand to spend on a single edge cutter, cannot recommend them enough. On the topic of cutting plastic, my last must-have tool is without a doubt an X-Acto blade, or hobby knife. I'm sure that almost every make and model of these is near identical. Personally, these are the ones that I'm using at the moment, and of course, I always make sure to have clean, sharp blades on hand. I do also keep a small box cutter style knife on hand as well. These are great for opening boxes, obviously, removing 3D printer brims, or cutting cork so that you're not dulling your nice X-Acto blades on those tasks. And before I forget, there is actually one more thing on my list of must-haves, and that is glue. If you're working mostly with FDM or resin prints, then super glue would be my go-to. Personally, I pick up whatever is cheapest at the hardware store. If you're working on larger models or something that needs a slightly stronger bond than super glue gives, try dusting the other connection with a thin layer of baking powder. The glue turns the baking soda into what feels like almost a hard resin, and makes for a super durable connection, making for a much more stable bond than super glue alone. And for anyone building Warhammer models or plastic kits, a bottle of Tamiya plastic cement should be your preferred glue. This stuff lightly melts sprue plastic, allowing you to actually chemically bond your models together, rather than just holding the parts with superglue. Before we get on to some of my more specific nice-to-have recommendations, let's run through a list of other hobby stuff I like to keep within reach of your hobby station. Firstly, a permanent marker and paint pen, great for marking up projects. A small notebook for keeping track of paint schemes and ideas. If you're into FDM printing, a simple lighter is perfect for removing minor stringing from prints. And it's always good to have a pair or two of tweezers. I specifically like the ones that rest closed, as they make holding onto small parts much easier. These are great for assembling delicate models, applying basing bits, or dipping small parts in glue. Other stuff I like to keep on hand are basing bits, cork coasters or sheets, grass tufts or flocking, as well as a range of gravel sizes. Bits of bark, cheap jewellery, chain, and any failed 3D prints or leftover bits from model kits all make for great basing supplies as well. Now there is one more thing on my list that kind of sits between a nice to have and a must have. Something that maybe you wouldn't necessarily expect to be a hobby essential, but once you've had one on hand for a while, you'll never want to go back. And that is a hairdryer. And frankly, the cheapest hairdryer you can find that has a hot and cold setting will do the job. This is not just great for drying your paint between layers, but also for heating up FDM prints or plastic models to bend the bits back into shape if you need to. The humble hairdryer can easily save you a lot of time during a longer painting session. I just wouldn't recommend using it on speed paints or washes. In terms of some nice to have equipment, once you're a bit deeper into the hobby, I would highly recommend picking up some sculpting supplies. Whether you're using this to gap fill printed or kit bashed miniatures, or use it to sculpt custom pieces for your model, this is a great tool to have to expand your hobby. I use Milliput as it works well enough as both a filler and a sculpting medium, but I do know that there are more specific products out there for one or the other. I would also recommend picking up a silicone sculpting tool, along with one or two metal sculpting tools. These tools, together with a dull or broken X-Acto blade, will let you get started playing around and adding some custom detail to models. Another thing that's always great to have on hand is a few different grits of sandpaper or sanding sticks. Almost an essential for 3D printed enthusiasts, but also handy for anyone kit bashing or sculpting on plastic models as well. If you already have sandpaper on hand, you can pretty easily glue a strip of sandpaper to a wooden dowel or popsicle stick to create some quick and easy sanding sticks if you need to. And the very last thing on my list of nice to haves are pinning supplies. I tend to lean towards armature wire for this, but you can just as easily use paper clips or something similar if you can find some with uniform thickness. And then using a small hand drill to create holes to tack these wires into. This is great for holding small parts for painting, or for adding some rigidity to small connections on a model. I often pin a miniature's legs into a cork base, or even use a lighter to heat up the wire, and melting a hole into a PLA base can be a great way to add some extra support. So, there you have it, my go-to tools, hobby must-haves, and a few recommendations of things to pick up or tuck away as you delve deeper into your hobby journey. It is worth noting that all of these tools and equipment are things that I have gathered over the first 4 or 5 years of my hobby. There is no need to run out and get all of this stuff at once. Focus on the essentials and build up as you find yourself needing new tools and equipment. Do let me know down below if there's any essentials that you think I missed, as I'm sure that there definitely is. Or let me know down below if you have any unique hobby tools that you really enjoy using. Like if you liked, and of course subscribe to stay up to date with future videos here on the channel, but most importantly, thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a good one.